Hey, my name is Alex Dilberto. Today we'll be talking about techniques you can use in your Ember projects right now to integrate with web analytics software. And the title of my presentation is Extending Ember with Analytics. What are web analytics? They're basically, it allows you to do a lot of different things. It gives you, the main thing it does is it gives you the power to know how visitors use your web application. It allows you to identify trends, make adjustments based on real data, real-time data, data like how many visitors visited your website, where they were from, which pages they viewed, if they're a returning visitor, how long they stayed on your website, all kinds of stuff. So it puts a lot of power into your hands about knowing that kind of information. It even allows you to know higher level things like how effective your marketing campaigns are for your website, different changes that you're making, are they effective? You can utilize A/B tests to improve conversion rates on key areas of your website, all that kind of stuff. Web analytics really drives a lot of that, and it makes it a lot easier. So these are some of the reasons why we want to integrate web analytics into Ember, into our web application today. So you see the Google Analytics logo there. I want to try to keep this talk library agnostic. I have some Google Analytics snippets sprinkled throughout the code just because it's such a popular library. But so what we're trying to do here is we're trying to integrate Ember with our analytics software. So integration, that's easy, right? You just sign up with your favorite provider. You copy paste the JavaScript into your web app, and you put your unique tracking identifier, and you're ready to go, right? No, it's not that easy because you can do that, but you're not going to get a whole lot of information because the only thing you're going to get out of that analytics approach is you'll just know how many people opened up your web application. You're not going to have any more visibility than that. So with single-page web apps now, things become a little less trivial. With Ember, things become a little less trivial, but it's not scary. We're going to find out different ways to implement it because that's what we want to do. So things to track. Here's a listing of different things that we're really concerned about tracking for as far as the viewers' data and that sort of thing, what they're visiting. The page views, we want to track where they're going on the application, and actions. We want to track what they're doing when they're in the application. So you can see some of the things that I have here within Ember: link to, transition to, replace with, standard stuff. Transition to and replace with are pretty much the same thing. Link to is just an anchor tag href. You see I have post 1 to post 2. That's just a model change. So we want to track when the user is on a route, but the model changes on that route. And also manual URL manipulation. So if the user goes into that window at the address bar and makes a change themselves, we want to be able to track that as well. The second part is actions. We want to track any template-based actions, double curly bracket action. We want to track any kind of programmatic sends, this.send action, this.trigger action. All those we want to track from the JavaScript code. So basically, internally, just a side note, internally, send action calls trigger action, which calls send under the hood of Ember. So we want to just keep that in mind because later I'm going to go into a more implementation-specific approach showing how we're going to leverage send for our action handling. At the bottom here, you see simple actions. Basically what that is, it's the user doesn't need to, you want to track simple actions when the user doesn't need to execute any specific default event handling. So things can be like tracking whether or not a timeout message appears, tracking whether or not a promise resolved or rejected. You don't necessarily need to fire any action on that, but you might want to track it just for your own information. So all these things. So the first one, I'm going to go into details about different techniques, good and bad techniques for the two that I mentioned before, for page view tracking and for actions tracking. So I'll start with page view. You can see I'm going to discuss a naive approach first. You can see here on the slides one specific implementation where you're using a mix-in. So you might come into this and say, oh yeah, I can just do this. I'll throw an analytics namespace on Ember global namespace, and I can have an observer on the inherent current path and the application controller, and I'll be good to go, right? I'll have my run loop. I'll pull in a URL off window location, and I know when they're going to change to different routes. But this is actually not a really good approach because we'll see a couple different reasons why. But you can see a couple of some alarms should be going off when you look at this initially, because you see Ember run next. Well, maybe we can improve on that. And we have an observer here, and we're looking at window.location. Well, what else can we do? Some reasons that this is a bad idea. I just talked about a few of them. One that I didn't speak about is because you're doing it with a mix-in, you can't rely on your auto-generated application controller. You have to actually generate that. So a little more work on your end, and not really convention over configuration, Ember way. You could mix in the analytics handler into any specific route that you wanted to track, but that's just a pain. We're not going to talk about that. It doesn't scale well. You have to manually grab the URL off window location. You don't have access to the internal router object within the scope of the mixin. A lot of different stuff. I'd say the worst things about it would be that it doesn't work. It does not work for model changes, which we discussed earlier, and it doesn't work for loading an error state. It just doesn't work because of the observer and the way the run loop works. So a much better approach is what we're utilizing in our app. It's basically it's making a hook. It's allowing you to hook into the application route based on did transition. So what that's going to allow us to do is a couple of things. Right in here, you don't see us grabbing anything off of window.whatever. We have scope to this.router get URL, which is the router's internal router object to Ember. We can just grab the URL. We can grab the current path, whatever you want to track. And run once, more performant, same run loop iteration. We're starting to learn a couple of different things. Maybe we had our initial approach, and now we're thinking about ways we can improve it. This is a big improvement. So talk about a couple more benefits here. Clean. You can use the auto-generated application controller if that's what you were using before, which you probably were. You don't have to worry about generating that yourself. Scales well. You can have access to the internal router object. That's very Ember-friendly now. And it works in all conditions. Route changes, dynamic model changes, error state, loading state. So that's about it for page tracking. You've seen a good implementation for that. Now I'm going to talk about action tracking. So this is the next part of the things that we want to track for the user. It's action. So I want to talk about a naive approach here. So you can see on my slides, I'm going to go over this example. For the first part, you can see that we have two templates. One template's called About Him. The second template's called About Her. And the templates just have a button on them, and the button just does some tracking. It says like him, like her. So what we're going to do to track that is we're going to make a action on the application route, which basically is analytics-only action, which is just going to have one job, and its whole life is just going to be to track these template-based actions wherever they are in the application. So you might think this is a good approach, but it's really not, because a lot of different reasons. It litters templates with analytics-only actions, which is not something we want. There's no encapsulation. Code fragmentation starts to happen really quickly. Things can get out of control. It's not a robust solution. Doesn't scale well, and doesn't allow for easy integrated programmatic action sending, things that we talked about before. This send action, this trigger action. Those things are going to be a lot harder because we're going to have to duplicate everything. We can't just make one call. We're going to have to make our normal call, and then we're going to have to make our analytics call. So again, it's just a lot of things that we can improve on with that approach. The next thing I'm going to talk about is a little bit more in depth. There's kind of a three-pronged approach here. And this is something that, again, we're going with for our application. And I want to talk about that. So a much better implementation would be to have a centralized object which holds all of the route-specific data that you want to send to your analytics software. So here, one of the things that we wanted to have was, you can see we have our analytics object, which we're declaring, and we have underscore colon, we have some property getting assigned to some POJO. That's because we want to have certain data sent for every time we communicate with our web analytics software. We want to have certain data sent. That's what that's allowing us to do. The next thing, we have underscore global. This is basically going to act as a non-route-based kind of fallback scenario where, my example, track promise works really well because you probably want to track promises and all different kinds of routes in your app. So maybe you put it in a global handler for the objects. Another thing here is you can see that it's not a POJO, it's not a string, it's a function, which is something we'll talk about later too. You can assign these objects, these properties to objects, JavaScript objects, or functions, which allow a lot more dynamic behavior. And the heart of it is the bottom part. This is just a small snippet, just to kind of wrap your head around it. This is a route-specific implementation. You can see that in my example I have, in the comments, it's a lot easier to understand. Maybe I have foo bar baz, and foo is the first route, bar is the most nested route, and baz is the action on that route. So you could imagine in your application you have a nested foo with bar inside of it, and then you have this action. You click on some button and fires this baz action. This is how we're going to basically know internally with our action handling where to go to get that data to send it to our analytics software. That's about it. You can pass in name parameters for the functions, or another great thing about having the functions, the way we're going to write this approach, we're going to actually scope it. So when you get into the function, you can say this dot whatever, and you'll have access to the correct scope, the correct element that it's calling this analytics object from. So you can make this really flexible. So this is part one. One final thing is, if it's not listed here, we're not going to track it. So we're listing everything explicitly. Part two is action handler. So it's a mix-in under the hood. It's kind of a lower level API. What it does behind the scenes is Ember uses some Ember magic and does some inheritance things, and it allows this action handler mix-in to be available on all routes, controllers, components, views, just by default. That's nothing that we're doing. That's just Ember stuff. And we're coming in and we're saying reopen. What that does is, if you haven't used that before, it basically is just augmenting the action handler's prototype with whatever changes we want to make. So we are saying the action handler implements the send function. That's pretty much all it does. It implements a couple other things, but the send function is the main thing we're looking at. So we're just basically saying, don't go do the default send behavior, do our stuff, and then we'll consider doing the default later. So that's what we're doing here. And the third part, so you think back, we've already talked about our analytics object. We've talked about the handler for reopening, so we have access to it. So now we just need to talk about a way that we can handle it at a route level, and some way that we can send our action to that action handler augmentation. This is a little confusing. I'm just going to go through it. This is a condensed approach, but I'll just kind of go through it line by line. Basically, at the beginning, this is our analytics handler. At the beginning, you see this var route, this target, ternary operator, all this stuff. We're basically just getting the correct scope for the internal router object, because it's actually different whether you're coming from a template-based action or whether you're coming from a programmatic send. So we're grabbing the correct scope for the router. Where the next thing we're doing is active trans. We're determining whether or not you're in an active transition. So if you are maybe, say, doing this.send foo action from a before model hook, you're going to be in the middle of a transition. We want to pick that up in here, so we're doing that pretty early in the function. Next, we are getting a handle to cur handler infos, which is just, it's an internal property. It's just an array of currently resolved routes in your application, from least nested to most nested. We're grabbing the most nested route, and then at the end here, we have route name and track object. Basically, these two are pretty key in determining the final data that's sent. This is what hooks back into the analytics object, if you remember that I talked about before. So what we're doing is here is we're determining basically an order of things that we want to do to send, to know what we want to send. So the first thing we're checking is whether or not you're transitioning. If you're transitioning, we want to get a hook to the new routes handler, not the current routes handler. That's the first thing we want to check. If you're not transitioning, we want to get your leaf most node or leaf most route, the route that the most nested route that you're on currently. If neither of those resolve, we want to get access to, or we want to try to see if whatever action you're passing is in the global handler from the analytics handler that we talked about before. And if nothing resolves, like I said, we're not going to track it. So that's kind of getting our hook to what we're looking to send. And then the last three if statements, basically what I'm saying is, if you're a function, I want to call you and get my returned POJO, get my returned object. This way I can do the next line, which is the merge with it. The next line is the merge. It just merges the global data that we want to send on every route with our route-specific data. And it's using our analytics handlers, which I haven't specified, but that's going to be the call to your Google Analytics library, whatever library you're using. And in this case, we're just doing a console log. So, and the last thing is the simple action handling that I was talking about earlier. We basically this super apply, basically what that's doing is we're saying, okay, we're going to do all our behavior, and then I'm going to call whatever default Ember behavior here at the end. But I don't want to do that if my action starts with _track, because this is a simple action. We don't care about doing whatever it is default action handler was on, or whatever default action handler we were worried about doing. That's pretty much it for that approach. I want to talk about a summary of the things. It's a fully declarative analytics pattern, the things that I just talked about, the 3 steps. No more litter templates with analytics-specific actions. The nice thing about this is if you have normal actions in your application, this is going to allow you to just hook in onto those actions rather than implementing your own specific analytics actions. It works for template, programmatic actions, works for all the things. Flexible encapsulation, decouples templates from analytics handling, lots of different things, centralized processing, and it's leveraging lower level APIs in Ember, so we have a good approach when we're doing it that way. So the next thing is I wanted to take a quick look at a little demo. If you didn't notice it before, I didn't say I had little JS bins at the bottom of all my slides, so you could have looked at the mini demos that I have, but this is a bigger demo. I want to show it to you, just get a high level of some of the things here. Okay, so here's my demo. You can see its UI is just an online bank. This pertains to the work that we're doing for our application currently. So you can see some of the things here. The only things I really want to focus in on here are analytics-specific behaviors. So we see a login. We want to log in with username, password. And I'm going to click login. You're going to see a couple different things here in the console out. Remember, this console out can be whatever. In our case, it's just a dummy spit text out to the browser, but it's really in production. It's going to be making your calls to your analytics software behind the scenes. So you see I clicked login, and I see a couple different things here. I see a page view, that the page that I'm currently on with my page view tracking, with my did transition hook, and the action that was sent by whatever it is I did, which was a login. You can see the username is getting passed in. So you can pass in whatever data you want to pass in with our approach. I'm going to go ahead and I'm prompted for a challenge of one-time password. I'm going to go ahead and select email. You'll see delivery method was 2. Email was the second delivery method. Again, you can pass in whatever you want to pass in. You can make this as tailored to your application as you want. I'm going to authenticate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Submit. See these actions: authenticate, register device. It shows me where I'm at. Submit. Now I am authenticated. I'm logged in. I'm at my root URL. I can click here. It shows me that this is an example of a model change. This is something we wanted to track. This isn't changing a specific route. This is changing the data that's backing the route. So we're tracking that successfully, something that we couldn't have done with our naive approach. I'm going to click on transfer. Say I want to make a transfer from my checking account, which had $1,000 in it, to my savings account, which had $5,000 in it. So I want to transfer $200. Transfer funds. I'm simulating a delay. Success. And you're going to see that we have some information here about the transfer that occurred from checking to savings, $200, the date, all these things. And it's reflected back in our application. The last thing is our statements tab here. I'm simulating an error. I just want to show that it's also tracking appropriately for situations that you might not expect. And this is statements, and you can see that there was a rejected action there. So I'm going to go back to my slides now that you have seen a little bit of the page view tracking and action handling. All right, so that was my demo, and basically just some references. You can see a link to my GitHub account if you want to take a peek at the code for the demo application. The slides that I showed earlier, they were kind of some condensed versions of it, so you can see the whole implementation. Thanks a lot. My name is Alex Dilberto. Again, you can follow me on Twitter. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message. I'll try to answer as quickly as I can. Thank you.